Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar this morning. It's 10:01, so we'll kick off and make a start. So thank you all very much for joining this session this morning, all around enhancing your security and building your security strategy for 2023. So first of all, if we have any people new to the company here, we are Cloud Direct. So we are a Microsoft Azure Expert MSP. One of the top rated Microsoft partners in the UK. So we hold most of the top Microsoft advanced specializations and solution partners designations, as well as our headline accreditation, which is the Azure Expert MSP. So we work very closely with Microsoft, and everything we do is built around the Microsoft tech stack and the Microsoft best practices as well. And that's very important. It's not just about taking that technology, it's building it and using it right. And we're going to touch on some of those things today. We also hold various certifications to complement those Microsoft accreditations and relationship. We have ISO 27001, 20000, and we also have Cyber Essentials, fully GDPR compliant as you'd expect, and of course that Azure Expert MSP. And I keep mentioning that because the Azure Expert MSP is a key one for us, because there are, I think it was something like, in the old standard there was about 70,000 gold partners globally. There was only about 70 Azure Expert MSPs, and in the UK it barely scratches double digits. So and to gain and maintain that, it's almost like an ISO audit we have to go through annually. So it's not just a case of go on some training courses and you get a badge. It's very much, we have to live and breathe everything we do and make sure we're doing it to the best possible practice, so that the companies that we're working with, again, are getting that best experience and the best knowledge and best use of the technologies. So I'm Mark Phillip. I'm the ISO and security manager here at Cloud Direct. I'm also a Cyber Essentials practitioner. So I head up our ISO compliance, Cyber Essentials, our Azure Expert MSP that I mentioned, our internal IT, and everything related and around that, around security and data protection. I also work closely with a lot of our customers, so we get involved on things like Cyber Essentials, so helping our customers work through to attain and gain that standard, and also we'll get involved as well if there are any compliance questions come up. If we have a major incident with a customer, if they've got we do sometimes say to get people will come to us for help with major incidents, so I'll often get involved with those from that security and compliance point of view, working with our wider team. So very much have a cross company and into our customers remit. Been in technology for 22 years now, been 23 this year, and working across public and private sector in that time, technology companies, the NHS, various MSPs, and across a variety of roles, but compliance has always been at the heart of that. As you can imagine, in the NHS, everything we did had to meet very stringent governance standards. That's just one example. Our LinkedIn's there, always happy to connect. I do try and share a fair bit of content around particularly security and compliance, and also some of the Microsoft technologies as well. And at the weekend, you may even get a bit of triathlon content in there, so apologies if that catches you unawares on your feed. So for today, we've got a fair bit to get through. What I'm going to try and do today, we're going to talk about some of the technologies from Microsoft a little later on. I want to take a kind of slightly bigger picture look here. We're not just purely looking at what technology do we need to put in and why would you do that. I want to help you sort of look at how should we look at our and build up our security and compliance strategy for the year. So what are the sort of things we as an organization need to be considering? And that's not just the technological answer. There's much more to it. So I hope to give you some thoughts on that today, and share some of the things that, in fact, very much we're doing constantly ourselves as well. So a few different topics there. We're going to talk about just the general how we sort of approach compliance from that business end of things. Talk about some of the security updates and the end of life dates from Microsoft. How we can actually consolidate and modernize our technology, and then flowing into data protection, particularly with Microsoft and that whole stack, and then just wrapping up to round it out with some updates and some key areas of focus from Microsoft, which will also sort of round out and tie back to some of the earlier points as well. There is a Q&A box up the top there, so if you do get any questions as we go along, please pop those into the Q&A box, and hopefully we'll have a few minutes at the end we can just recap on any of those. If we do run tight to time, I'll try or we run over for questions, then we'll certainly make sure we can publish some answers and get the team to come back to you following up the event as well. So when we're talking about planning for our compliance in the year, how do we build out that strategy? First of all, let's come back to the business. Let's come back to the organization. What does compliance mean to you? It's one of those terms that gets used a lot, but quite often will have a completely different meaning for every organization. So let's start at the beginning. What are your business requirements and your business risk areas for the coming year? Or perhaps you're building a multi-year strategy as well, but let's just keep to a year for now. So where are your risk areas, and also what are the business requirements for the year? What does the business need to be doing to grow? Now, some of that will be things like perhaps engaging more sales staff, more operation staff. It might be you need new premises. Yeah, it's a lot of other things as well. But what are the business going to be? What does the business want to do? Is the business looking to grow as a business? Is it looking to expand its customer base, move into another country? Whatever those may be. And what are your risk areas as well in partnership with that? What have you identified on your risk area that are risks to your business? And as I say, are you looking at business growth? That in itself, just alone, can throw up all kinds of challenges. And our changing business operations, of course, such as hybrid working. Now, going back to the beginning of the pandemic, of course, everyone got thrown into work from home in a lot of industries, and everyone had to adapt at a pace. It was really fast moving. And for a lot of organizations, that really was a case of updating, changing what you do and how you worked on an almost emergency basis. It was done really fast, and often there were solutions and ways of working put in place that kind of just met the needs. It kind of got you by. What organizations are very much doing now, though, now we're coming through and out that pandemic and returning to a new normal, or a new normal, is it now? I've lost count how many news we've had. But what they're now doing is actually saying, right, what does the future look like for us? I think it's broadly accepted for many industries. We're not going back to the ways of working that we were pre-pandemic. That's one thing we've seen from that. Is there a return to the office? Yes, absolutely. Is it the complete 9 to 5, Monday to Friday that we had before? In many cases, not. And that varies across industries. It varies across businesses. So there's no this sort of one size fits all that you might read about. But for your organization, very much now, a lot of organizations are looking ahead and saying, right, okay, well, if we want some people in the office, great. But we perhaps also want people to be more mobile, be able to work from home if that's right for them. So what the people are now doing is saying, okay, we had to put certain places or certain technologies in place just to get by through the pandemic. Is that now right going forward? And when we also factor in the other business requirements, risks, growth, etc., when we build that into a picture, you'll probably find that in a lot of cases, what you put in just to get by in the pandemic probably isn't fit for purpose looking forward. So how does that update? And you're starting to build out your use cases and your needs. So to complement that, we also have certain things we may need to attain. So there could be compliance standards that you want to attain. I've mentioned some of ours already. Now, again, the reason for attaining these does change from organisation to organisation. In certain industries, there are mandated compliance standards. You have to have them to function in that area. In the UK, we see it a lot now that a lot of public sector contracts will require things like cyber essentials and many others as well. So there can be a requirement just because that is the industry and the area you work in, that you just have to have these standards. But a lot of the time organizations want these to attain these standards because actually it shows that they're doing the right thing, they're following a recognized framework and operating in the best possible practice. Now that then is a positive. They're doing things right. Their customers have confidence in them. And for us, again, that touches back in many areas. So the various Microsoft accreditations I mentioned we hold earlier, that shows that we actually understand those technologies and we deploy them to the best practice. We can't hold those badges if we're not doing that. And in the wider sense, our ISOs, so the security, the service management, again, that means that we're following recognized best practices and we're audited to make sure we keep up to date on that. And increasingly, we're now seeing that customers who are coming to us expect us to hold that. So although it's not necessarily an industry requirement, the businesses that we are now working with and partnering with, they expect us to have that because that's the standards they hold us to. So there's many reasons, but we could be building in our compliance standards. Now, to underpin all this as well is not just technology again. We have to look at our policies and processes. So we now understand what our business needs are. We've built out perhaps that we need to attain certain compliance standards. And we now understand what the requirements of those are. So how can we then go about actually achieving this? So we can then start looking at our policies and process. Again, security and compliance is not an IT thing. Data protection isn't either. There's a mindset, I guess you could say, that I keep coming across where this sort of thing becomes, it's an IT thing. And it's not, it's a whole organization thing. Now, technology is a key part of it, as we're going to delve into more and more today as we go through. But it is not just an IT thing. This is how your business operates. It is how your business thinks about information security. And this is underpinned by policy and process. And I'm not suggesting war and peace here in documentation that probably gets written once a year for an audit and then no one looks at. It's got to be right for you. But you do have to have some policies, process and guidance from the top down in the business. This is how we expect to operate as a practice. So we build that picture out. That then feeds into the technological solution. So we can then actually use technology to help us achieve some of this, not all of it, but a good chunk of it. So if we've identified that we need to have, we set a standard for ourselves that we want secure collaboration, secure document management. We want to make sure that you can't perhaps accidentally send an email with a spreadsheet with a ton of confidential documentation in it. Our standard says we shouldn't do that. That's our process and our policy. So our policy says that. But how do we achieve it? One method could be through technology, using the tools available in things like SharePoint and Teams and Purview. We could say that we expect our environments to be kept up to date. We want all the latest security patching in place. We want to make sure our laptops are running correctly and in a secure manner. There's different ways you could go about that. You could have someone going around checking all your laptops once a day. Probably not the most efficient use of someone's time. So that's where the technology controls, such as the tools in Microsoft 365 or Azure Security or Azure Sentinel, can all help us. So we understand what we need. We then put a policy in place which says here's what we want to achieve, and then we can use technology to help us achieve that. And it's about making the technological solution right for you and those requirements, not just putting a solution in because it happens to be the latest, greatest one that a particular company is selling. It's got to actually drive value and relate back to those policies and those requirements. And what I want to touch on as we go through, and you see this coming up again and again today, is that's what I want to try and link how we actually build out our security strategy, is that we're linking back to those. So it becomes a seamless sort of end-to-end piece there. Now, one thing I just mentioned there in passing obviously was keep things up to date. And now that is a key part, because one of the big areas of vulnerability for many organizations is out-of-date software. A lot of malware that's out there will take advantage of known vulnerabilities. This is not secret stuff. Microsoft and all the other security vendors, I'll talk about Microsoft, that's our lead partner, but any similar situation across many other secure product vendors, software vendors. They issue patches, they issue updates constantly. They tell you what they've fixed. Now, by implication, if you haven't applied that patch, you haven't got that fix, hence you are still vulnerable. And the cyber criminals will take advantage of this. And malware is written to take advantage of this. So you have to keep on top of your supported operating systems and software. Microsoft document all this via that link I've put on the bottom of the slide there. And I've just pulled out a few of the headline pieces, platforms that are going end of life this year. There are more, some of the more specialized sort of software as well, but for brevity, I've kept some of the headlines here. So, for example, Windows 8.1, if you were using that went end of life on January the 10th. It's no longer getting security updates. There are various Office 2013 products going out end of life in April. There are Windows 10 versions going end of life May and June. Certain server products, Hyper-V and Windows Server, going end of life in October. And particularly those last ones, the Hyper-V and the Windows Server, if you are running your own infrastructure on premise, those could be ones that if you are still running them, you need to start planning now to actually update or replace and modernize those. And I'll come a bit more on some of those topics in a moment. But the key thing here is if you are still running those platforms, you are vulnerable. And if you were to have malware, it could take advantage of this. It's not the only possible threat vector, but it is certainly a key one that does come up. So it's all about keeping up to date. Now, as we talk about some of the technologies as we go through, there are ways actually now that you can sort of keep up to date a lot easier than perhaps in the past. But the Windows 10 one does catch people out. It's worth keeping an eye on that. Windows 10 has a much faster sort of end of life rate and a much faster release cadence for updates than previous versions of Windows. So you do need to keep on top of that. But as long as you're running the Windows updates, you should be fine. So there's another point that we need to build into our strategy. Now, another key thing to look at is actually consolidating and modernizing. And again, coming out of perhaps the pandemic era where, let's go back to pre-pandemic, a lot of organizations had an IT infrastructure, and they've then had to rapidly change bits of it to suit remote working under the pandemic, and now they're moving out and forward. What's happened, we quite often see over time, is that a lot of organizations actually have quite a disparate sort of product stack, technology stack, because historically perhaps Microsoft didn't have an offering in a certain area, or there was a deal on and it made, for someone in the organization really liked a particular product, so they went with it. They knew it delivered what was needed at the time. Various reasons, but it's not uncommon that we see a lot of different products in use. So when we look at our consolidation, again, this whole do more with less concept that Microsoft are very much pushing at the moment, and we're going to sort of see that underpinning a lot of what we're talking about. It's in the current environment, current economic structure in situation, money is tight everywhere. Everyone is looking for cost savings or better use, more efficient use of budget. So consolidation can help us with that. So it's key to understand what you've currently got, understand your current technology stack, and could there be a better use of it? So that can sometimes be as simple as a more efficient use of licensing. If you're using Microsoft 365, are you using all the tools in it correctly? Or perhaps are you on maybe not the most appropriate licensing level? Microsoft changed the offerings within all the different levels over time. So it may have been that the one you were on from several years ago actually isn't the most appropriate now. And perhaps there's another one that might even be a bit cheaper and it does everything you need. That's not unknown. Also in Azure, utilizing things like reserved instances and some of the best practices around things like well-architected framework, and that can actually help as well. So it's all about reviewing what you've currently got and saying, is this the best? Is this delivering against our businesses? And this is that sort of best use of everything. And then we can bring that perhaps down into less platforms and products, but achieving the same, if not more. And just to illustrate that a little further, again, we could have this aging on-premise infrastructure. We could have old technologies that were right at the time. 5 years ago, they did the job, they did what we needed, but they're not perhaps right now, not aligned to our business needs. As I said, about several different technologies. As a result of that, higher costs. If you're paying 3 or 4 different vendors for different services, the chances are that adds up to more than paying just one with a consolidated product stack. And equally as well, you could have security vulnerabilities, because again, if that technology stack hasn't evolved as your business has evolved and how you're operating has evolved, the likelihood is gaps have been left behind. So I loop right back to what I said at the beginning. What are the business goals? What the business needs? We take all this into account, and then we can look at how we can actually consolidate, modernize, and enable the business better as well. And this is a particular, just to look at this in a different way again, this is a kind of typical layup that is not unknown across many organizations. Quite common, particularly coming from an on-premise infrastructure or even other cloud infrastructures that were built using perhaps older best practices. You may have separate email servers, mail filtering, file servers, identity access management, device management in a different platform completely. You may have a remote desktop platform. You might have a SIEM source solution, app servers. You can have loads of different things, whether that's different servers, different cloud platforms. Yeah, that's quite common. What we can do, though, with the consolidation in mind, is actually say, well, if we take the Microsoft product stack now, and this is where this has moved on very much from, even 5 years ago, certainly 10 years ago, we actually look at these workloads. So we don't look and go, right, I want to use Microsoft Cloud because I don't want to run my own infrastructure now, my own on-premise infrastructure. Let's lift and shift that and put it in Azure. No. That is not the best way to go about it. You will just end up spending an awful lot of money and to achieve that end goal. But what we do is we look at the whole Microsoft Cloud product stack and we take those workloads bit by bit. So we start off email server, that goes into 365 and Exchange Online. File server, likely SharePoint and OneDrive, perhaps some Azure Storage and Azure Files as well. Our mail filtering via Defender for cloud. Phone system, Teams calling, managed devices we can do now in Intune in 365. Our perimeter security, again, we can use various pieces of the Defender stack and Azure firewalls to help across that. If we still need an RDS platform or remote desktop service, then we've got Windows 365 or Azure Virtual Desktops, slightly different use cases for those. App servers, we don't necessarily need to lift and shift those. Sometimes we do, but not always. Again, we can modernize and perhaps use some of the Azure PaaS services a lot more, and which again is a much more efficient use of that spend, and you get a lot more functionality as well. And then rounding all that out with our SIEM source solution, which will be Sentinel, which is doing all of the monitoring and the intelligence around this whole stack for our security. And Sentinel, and here's the thing, sometimes you say, well, why should I put all my eggs in one basket? And I can see the logic where they're coming from, but actually, when you look at the actual stack itself, what it can deliver for you, do we have any problems with Microsoft where everything I've just spoken about has gone down? I don't believe we have. Not, you may have outages in one particular part of the platform, as you would have with any cloud provider. But generally speaking, it's limited and short term. So the great thing here again is, with all of these being part of the Microsoft Cloud, albeit on the different parts of the platform, they talk to each other, they join up. And this is a key thing Microsoft have been building over the past few years. So the likes of Sentinel as our monitoring solution, we can bring feeds in from all the Defender products. We can bring in from our monitoring of our devices, of our Azure environment, of our Azure firewalls. And the minute there's any kind of risk, actions can be put in place to actually deal with that. So everything is joined up and it starts bringing it through into one place. So it's much more efficient, as well as a well-rounded holistic picture. So when we're talking about efficiency, you're looking at that Sentinel portal and picking up all your feeds from that, rather than having to actually perhaps look at alert portals in 4 or 5 different platforms. and again, consolidating costs as well. And so what this also then brings us aside of a kind of a well-rounded tech stack that is talking to each other and complements each other, is built to work with its component parts. Of course, as I say, you're getting much more value for money, and it's fit. Your tech stack is now fit for those business purposes. So if you've got a highly mobile workforce, you've now got things like device management in place to control that. You're controlling your data. So although it's held in SharePoint and OneDrive, and people are out on the road accessing it remotely, you can still control what happens to it. So there are a lot of controls you can put in around how that data, what happens to that data when if it leaves your organization. So much we can do as it's all rounded out. And I love this quote from Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft. I think first said around 2019. He said it a few times. Every company is now a software company. I think what he's really calling to here is the fact that actually there is something in all these tech stacks for all different organizations. So everyone can benefit as a business, whether it's helping drive the business requirements or the business goals, value for money, better security. But every company is now in that software company space where they can actually utilize these and get more out of it. Spoken a lot there about how we can take our existing tech stacks and update those and update our infrastructure and bring it forward into sort of the sort of modern requirements for the business and such like. Something I haven't touched yet too much on is data protection, which obviously is a key requirement for any security and compliance strategy. And what I just wanted to touch into here was to talk briefly about what Microsoft do in this area. And as I'll come to in a moment, just to break down a bit further, this isn't just, what organizations shouldn't do is think, great, my data is in the Microsoft cloud, Microsoft do all this amazing stuff, it's safe, it's compliant, it's protected, there's security in place. It's a little more granular than that. It's a bit of a yes and no. So I'm going to break that down now just for clarity, because it's something that we're having a lot of conversations around this with organizations at the moment. And it's important to understand where your responsibility lays and where Microsoft are and how the two complement each other. So what do Microsoft do? Well, Microsoft have a global network of data centers and related infrastructure. And the key thing here is that one of the biggest things that comes up with when I'm talking to organizations is you have control over where your data is. So importantly for us here in the UK, there are 2 UK data centers, UK South and UK West. So you can build your Azure environment to run purely in those regions. You can, when you set up your 365 tenants, you can configure it to go in the UK. In fact, if a new tenant now built from a UK company, it would default to that anyway. You could say, actually, we're happy under our data protection, risk assessments that actually we'd be happy if that data was stored in the EU as well. And yeah, there's EU data centers available for you. If you're a company that works across more regions, again, there are those regions out there that would suit how your business operates. So, but the fundamental importance here is the choice is up to you. And in running that infrastructure, that global infrastructure, Microsoft do adhere to a large number of different compliance standards. So this is a screenshot from the Microsoft website via the Trust Center portal, and these are all links to tell you more about that standard and what Microsoft do about it. So if ever you're doing vendor due diligence and saying, right, is Microsoft right for us? How do they operate? What do they do? They've put a lot of content out around privacy, their approaches to privacy. And there's various other blog posts from people like their chief legal officers, various statements from that sort of area as well. And if you actually ever want to hear a bit about what Microsoft do straight from the horse's mouth, as it were, I recommend look on YouTube, look for a guy called Brad Smith. He's there, I think he's President and Chief Legal Officer, I think is his title. And he speaks all kinds of events globally around, particularly around data privacy, and makes he's a fascinating guy to listen to. But he really lays out the stall on where he believes they're coming from. So yeah, if you want to grab a coffee and 10 minutes on YouTube, then that's he's a great guy to go and listen to, Brad Smith from Microsoft, and really lays out quite thoughtful insights there. But yeah, come out to Microsoft. They actually do have a number of compliance standards, so many will be completely irrelevant to a lot of organizations, many more relevant. So if ever you thought, well, what do Microsoft do as far as Cyber Essentials or 27001, they're in there. You want to know if Microsoft have attained a SOC accreditation. SOC 1, 2 and 3 are in there, and if you click those links, it'll take you to the relevant certificates as well. So as part of your vendor due diligence, you can actually come here and find out and get all the information you need from Microsoft. Sometimes I've been working with organizations as well who come to us and say, right, we actually have had due diligence performed on us. Can you help us? So what they will do is go back to their customers and say, right, well, here's our own privacy policies and what we do and what we operate. Remember at the beginning, I said it's policy as well. What do we as a company do? What is our standpoint for data privacy? And then in tandem with that, they'll say, our core platform is Microsoft, and here's what Microsoft do. So the two work hand in hand. And that really leads us nicely into the shared responsibility model. And I like to talk about this because, and this applies actually not just to Microsoft. I mean, obviously, given who we are, I'll talk about Microsoft, but this applies to any technology provider you're working with. So, like I said, sometimes I have come across organizations in the past who have this sort of, their sort of thought process is, I'm using 365, that should be secure because it's 365, isn't Microsoft great? And like I said earlier, there's a bit of a yes and no here. So I'm actually going to work here from sort of right to left, actually. So if you were maintaining your own on-premises infrastructure, you had your own data center or a server room or whatever that looks like, you would be responsible for everything. You'd be managing the physical facilities, the server room, the access. You'd be maintaining the servers, the network, the power, the redundancy, etc., etc. You'd manage everything. And then coming up this list as well, you'd also then be looking after the operating systems on the VMs. You'd be looking after the actual configuration of that network. You'd be looking after your identity and access management. You'd then be running your, managing all your devices and your data and how that's all managed, set up, and controlled. You do the whole lot. So if you then start using an IaaS partner, such as certain parts of Azure, so if you were running perhaps certain VMs in Azure, then this is where Microsoft starts taking over a bit of that responsibility. So this is where that due diligence on Microsoft becomes key. Are they doing what they need to do for their bits of the jigsaw? So Microsoft then will take over and run the physical data center, the physical network, and the physical hosts. So these big warehouse-like buildings and data centers with all of these this infrastructure inside, that's what they're running, they are responsible for. And in fact, actually, you can even go on, they do virtual tours of that. You can find it via their website. It's quite fascinating to see. But they look after that. But you are still responsible for, in the IaaS model, the operating system, the configuration of the network, your device management, etc. Microsoft give you the tools in the Microsoft Cloud Stack to be able to manage and do all that, but they leave it up to you how you configure it to suit your organization. So you could be highly vulnerable if you've not deployed any security within that, but it's within the realms of that. You haven't used the tool, those tools correctly in the toolbox. If we move over to platform as a service or PaaS, the lines blur a little more because there are, depending on the PaaS services, certain things that Microsoft would still deliver, but there are certain PaaS services where you may be actually still involved on some of that. So it's key to understand that if you're moving forward with certain PaaS services, such as things like Azure SQL and many others. And then we move over to SaaS and software as a service, which is where Microsoft 365 would sit. So again, Microsoft are looking after the whole 365 infrastructure, the physical data center. They run the 365 networks at cloud level, the applications such as Word, Online, Exchange Online, SharePoint, and so on. But there's still certain things there that they will give you all the tools to be able to achieve security and manage your data and your device and your users, but it's up to you how you use it. So identity and directory infrastructure, again, it's a little bit of a 50-50, but the accounts, identities, devices, and information data is all very firmly with the organization. And it's absolutely key to understand this, because this forms a large part of how you make sure that your security strategy is well-rounded. Now, where we sit in all of this as a key partner is we can help organizations translate this into practicalities. So if we have an organization comes to us and say, right, we've got this 365, we're not really sure what those tools are. Those tools I mentioned that are our responsibility, what are they? Are we using them correctly? And that's the advice we can give in. And likewise with the other areas as well, we can help you build the Azure environments, utilizing the best practice on the network controls and the network configuration, for example. So, but it is absolutely key to understand that this is not just, and again, this is not just, you know, if you're partnering with Cloud Direct or any managed service provider, although they will be helping you to manage these things, configure them, it's still key for your security strategy to at least have a high level understanding of, right, even if I don't understand technology, are my devices secure? Are my laptops secure? And I would always suggest go and question your IT partner. If you have an outsourced IT partner, go and question them. They should be talking to you about what you've got. We issue monthly reports on security, making recommendations for updates to our managed service customers. You know, that's the sort of thing that should be happening. There should be a two-way dialogue constantly, and you should always be updating because things change. But it's definitely that shared model. It's not just, oh, it's Microsoft, they take care of it, or it's my MSP, they take care of it. You know, you've a vested interest in all of this. So it's key to understand that and build that into your strategy as well. And just to round out really on the sort of Microsoft front, and just to kind of be talking about this as we've gone along, but again, Microsoft very much are now a multi-cloud, multi-platform vendor across the various product stacks for security and access management and such like. But that extends as well. And this is the other key thing to remember with Microsoft is that they do operate across multiple platforms and devices now. So if you run an estate of iPhones, Macs, Android, great. You can extend the Microsoft security across that. Obviously Windows as well, but yes, very much so. I use an Android phone. We have Android and iOS in our estate. As with many organizations, we can control the security around those. For cloud platforms though as well, and this has been a big step forward in recent years, again, is it's not just the Microsoft security portfolio as it applies to Azure. They have now extended the Defender capabilities out to AWS and Google Cloud workloads as well. So you, again, when I talk about this consolidation, why have perhaps a SIEM source solution running in AWS and another one in Azure and another one in Google Cloud when actually Sentinel will do the lot? So more cost effective, but again, from a management and efficiency point of view, it's going to give you a lot more there as well. So it's a much more well-rounded product portfolio than perhaps 10 years ago when, yeah, absolutely. I was there in that, working for MSPs, and we did bolt together this sort of layered approach of multiple different technologies because it wasn't always all available from Microsoft. And that's very much changed. What we're also seeing is that this is now reflected via independent reporting as well. So if you've ever seen the Gartner Magic Quadrants, where they're looking at who are the leaders, who are the sort of movers and shakers in various industries, Microsoft are very much always in the leaders quadrants now. I've called out two recent ones here, access management and security event and incident event management, where they're up as leaders. There are many other Gartner quadrants in and around security and the technologies that they equally appear up in that top right corner. So they're now actually getting recognized. If you look at some of the other names in there, if anyone's more familiar with some of the other sort of movers and shakers in the industry, those are some of the top names up there as well that they're now in that quadrant with. So I think, yeah, previously, let's say going back a few years, certainly I don't think we would have seen that, but they've definitely moved on from that. So just like to round out, really kind of bring that all together now with just some headlines that we're seeing from Microsoft for 2023. And I'll try to sort of keep this fairly sort of to the point of what we're talking about, building out our strategy. So again, this do more with less message. Microsoft are really pushing this an awful lot, and it kind of makes sense for a lot of the reasons that I've been talking about today. So do more with less, simplify your vendor management. Now, one of the key points of our ISO is that actually we have to understand who our vendors are, and we manage that relationship with them. And that can be through things like, the cost of the service they provide. Are they providing the service that we're paying for under the SLAs? Data security, all kinds of different things. So actually, why have 5 vendors when one can do the lot? And obviously, you can then build in extra support there via a partner such as Cloud Direct as well. But simplify that management, and again, that can bring in those cost savings through that consolidation that I spoke about earlier. Reducing threats with AI and automation, so greater use of the Microsoft security stack, so across the Defender products and into things like Sentinel. Microsoft are baking AI and automation all of the time. So now if there were an attack happening overnight, so let's say your MD's email was trying to be compromised through a brute force attack overnight, actually the platform can now take action automatically to lock that account down until perhaps your IT team come in the morning and can respond to it. So that can happen all through that automation. It picks up, it detects what looks like an untoward an attack. Someone's hitting your MD's 365 account, with hundreds of login attempts because they're running a dictionary attack. It'll lock it down. So it just stops it in its tracks. So all of that sort of thing, and many other. That's just one example, but there's many others as well. And utilizing the tech stack can help you be a lot more secure like that. And that operational efficiency as well. Again, why have multiple platforms you've got to support, you've got to maintain knowledge about, maybe have multiple vendors involved. Why have that when actually you can simplify it? And then that leads on to the sort of 5 key priorities that Microsoft see around, particularly around identity and governance. And I totally agree with this one. I think identity management is one of the big things that everyone should look at this year. I did a video not long ago about key things for 2023, and I put identity management up there. It's the one thing we keep seeing compromises. The amount of times we're seeing a organization had a data compromise. The amount of times at the moment we're seeing it was down to a user account being compromised, and then the compromise spread from there, time and again. And even if it's just simple things like using MFA or greater control over things like admin rights on accounts or whatever it is, but there's some simple stuff quite often we just see it time and again. So absolutely having that defense in depth approach, so kind of touching a lot of things I've already spoken around, that posture management, looking at vulnerabilities, bad policies, just that whole posture of making sure that we're in a good place. That real-time protection, I touched on it just now around that, that protection around things like, if there's an attack going on, the platform actually identifies it and deals with it quicker than you ever, almost ever could. But also the things like utilizing the controls around conditional access, setting rules for how your data is accessed, and configuring that identity and access management accordingly. So there's a lot we can do there that actually is almost baked in the platform. The tools are all there. You just need to kind of switch them on, enable them, and get them set up right for you. And yeah, absolutely, it's all about that modernization piece we spoke about earlier. So again, why have several different platforms and a different identity management that you've bolted on the front of it? You've again got to manage this. Sign it, link it all together, and the whole lot talks a lot better. Zero trust. You may have heard of this one. Has been in our minds a lot, certainly over the last year, particularly. And zero trust is key. It kind of touches in so many areas. And zero trust basically works on 3 key pillars. Verify explicitly. So whether it's a user login or an access to data or whatever it may be, we explicitly verify that we are happy with that access. We set up certain controls, certain gates to go through that we explicitly have to tick, and if we haven't checked that, we don't let you in. We use least privilege access. The days should now be long gone where everyone had admin rights. There is no justifiable reason for that now. Fortunately, sadly, it still happens. But the least privilege access is the principle that you only have the access you need. We shouldn't be blocking people from doing their job, but they only have the access they need to do their job. And if they need a higher level of access, such as global administrator, that is segregated from their everyday account. So it's a combination of those access rights for things like technical maintenance, but it can even be access rights in your data platform. So if you're in SharePoint, for example, an admin clerk shouldn't have access to the business accounts if it's not part of their role. That would be your finance director would have that, for example. And it's about that, setting those permissions and those boundaries. There's also the page system. The third pillar is that we always assume breach. And by that, I mean, if you ever have any suspicion that something is untoward, you start from the point that you've had a compromise. Almost that worst case scenario, you start there and you work back. Because that way, even if actually it was a red herring and it wasn't a compromise, that's fine. You deal with it, you move on. But if it were a compromise, you're dealing in that worst case scenario, which means you're going to be able to lock it down faster and attend to it and deal with it faster. Why this is so critical is for a lot of organizations, when they first become aware of something that just doesn't look quite right, they don't necessarily know if it's a compromise or not. It's too early to say. They know something's not right, but they don't know quite what it is. If it is a compromise, you need to lock it down. You know, you need to stop it in its tracks. That's key. Fast action is key. So it's better that you take that sort of worst case scenario approach, lock everything down, assume you've had a breach, and then you come back from there. And if it isn't, brilliant, good news. But if it is, you've taken the steps early to stop it in its tracks. Whereas if you don't do that, that compromise can carry on to worse consequences. So we always assume breach. So zero trust is a key thing, and that can be applied not just technologically, but actually in our processes as well. It's a kind of a process as much as a technological approach. So, and also we can then simplify, automate our identity governance, and this is better use of the tools that are available to us. So there are a lot of tools we can use that automatically will check that we're happy with an access that someone makes. So it could be that I set up some conditional access policies that say I only want to let someone log into their SharePoint and access our company data if they are on a trusted device and if they're from a trusted location and they've gone through certain criteria such as MFA and variations on a theme within that. So we can actually simplify it. We can set all those policies up. So provided people are meeting the criteria, they're just going to log in. They won't even notice it's there. I've worked at home now for 3 years since I've been at Cloud Direct. I've been to the office a handful of times, largely due to the pandemic, but also now I'm more remote based anyway. I just get on my laptop in the morning, I log in and I'm working. Now I know in my role, because it's part of my remit, is I know there's a lot of security going on behind the scenes there and a lot of checks and balances. It never stops me. I just sit on my laptop, start up, and I'm working. And that's where we need to get to, that the security is there. We've simplified it, but actually it doesn't stop our end users. So it's that best of both worlds. And just calling back to as well what I spoke about earlier about the value for money, you know, verifying our remote users in a much cheaper, faster, more trustworthy way. And again, it's using the tools that are there in the stack so that people can just log in straight away and do their work legitimately. But we stop the people we don't want coming in. So identity management, very much key this year. It's not the only thing to consider, but it's certainly a big one. So that brings us to the end of this session. I'm just going to check the Q&A. I don't think we've had any questions come in. No, it doesn't look like it. So I hope that was useful to everyone, giving you some food for thought. Like I said earlier at the beginning, I try not to just come from purely what technology should we be building in this year, but actually how, what is right for our business, and that's the sort of wider, if you like, the bigger picture. So any questions on follow up on this, do feel free to get in touch with the team. Via one of our channels there. Like I said at the beginning, happy to accept connections on LinkedIn as well, myself as well as the business. And any questions, yeah, feel free to fire them either at the team or myself. And we'd look forward to hopefully talking to you in future. But we'll wrap the session up there as there's no questions. And thank you again for your time. Like I said, I hope that was useful. Appreciate you taking time out this morning to join us, and wish you a great rest of the day.